Thanks, Nishant. Jim started his career with Nenni Associates in 2009, has been leading the team focused on electrical and renewable energy business unit. He's a managing partner focusing on new market initiatives, effectively expanding the Nenni brand. He holds a bachelor's degree from Northern Illinois University and is an active participant in multiple industry conferences, including LightFair, NAESCO, and the Energy Services Coalition. Corey, who's also going to be presenting today, is also a managing partner with Nenni Associates, where he currently manages sales and account management within the energy services and building automation sector. Since joining the company in 2011, he actively engages in industry trade shows, educational forums, and other outlets to educate himself and the organization, demonstrating a true desire to help his clients meet their needs. In addition, he leads account management efforts for strategic accounts, developing strong relationships with clients to aid in personal planning and organizational development. They work in this industry every day, and they're going to provide some tips and tricks that I think all of us could benefit from. And I will turn it over to Corey.
Thank you, Josh, and the rest of the board. All right. Thank you, Josh, and the rest of the board here for giving us the opportunity to chat with your members and those that are interested in the topic at hand, which is marketing yourself to the energy industry. So just to kind of elaborate a little bit further on our firm, our firm has been operating within the energy efficiency space as a recruiting partner and consultant for about a little over 25 years. Jim and myself have both been with the organization for 10 years. We've spent our entire careers really from the ground up advising candidates and clients on recruiting strategies, developing compensation plans across the board, specifically focused within this space. So it's a great opportunity for us to chat with you guys, answer any questions that you might have. We really do want this to be interactive, so please interrupt us, ask the questions that you might have. If there's anything that you want clarity on for us to dive a little bit deeper into, we're happy to do so, okay? Jim, anything to add on that end?
Yeah, I would just echo that you're not going to break up our flow if you interrupt. We want interruptions, we want questions, we want comments, we want this to be conversational. And the other thing I should add is I should have updated my bio. I will be at the AEE conference in a few weeks or next month in New Orleans. So I should have added that I soon to be participant in AEE. At least at the conference.
Out there, Jim.
So yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you guys out there. It'd be great. Yeah. So yeah, Corey, go ahead.
Real quick, so, and if you guys have questions, feel free to type them in the chat as well. If you're more comfortable doing that, that's fine as well. Go ahead, Corey.
And so I'm going to share my screen here. I believe that should work. Is that coming through okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So as we said, our topic's here to give you guys some guidance, answer some questions, some tips and tricks, some things you might not know about in regards to marketing yourself in the space. Okay. Kind of the topics that we're going to be going through as it relates to today is overarching macro hiring trends. There's a lot of things that are going on that people consistently cite as areas of interest, things that they're curious about, some things that are current event related that are going on that we'd like to touch on. We're going to then go into how to stay relevant with your current organization, how to stay relevant within the industry, be seen, heard, and then kind of give you some opportunities. A lot of folks make the assumption that if things aren't going bad, why should I be looking for a job? Why should I be exploring and seeing what else is out there? We're going to give you some tools and tricks to be aware, maybe dip your toe in the water, be cognizant of what's going on, not necessarily at that point where you need to make a transition, okay? And then Jim's done an outstanding job over the years of really developing some great tips and tricks as it relates to the actual interview process itself, the follow-up, follow-through, that, really does set you apart from your average candidate. Does that make sense? So on that note, Jim, do you want to talk on some of the investment going on in the space?
Yeah, so I think it's coming from a couple of different angles here. So one of the most obvious ones that I've noticed was like this energy as a service space, which of course is going to be different than traditional energy performance contracting, but I assume most folks here are going to be familiar with the energy as a service model, right, Josh?
I would think so.
Okay. Yeah, I know we got some really smart, intelligent people that are, tuning in here. But yeah, the basic idea here is that, these private sector customers, it's mostly a model you're going to see with commercial, industrial, healthcare type entities that have an opportunity to upgrade their facilities without taking anything out of their capital expenditure budget, right? So you have a lot of these like energy as a service clients that are coming to the table and they're upgrading HVAC, LED lighting, building automation control, solar. The money's coming from somewhere. So you're seeing a lot of like these big banks that are investing into these models. So they get a portion of the return. They get the benefit of investing into renewable energy and energy efficiency. It's not so much like a tax credit type play, like the tax equity play, but you're still seeing a lot of money from a lot of these large institutional investors, the brands that you would be familiar with. You're seeing them get involved in these energy as a service projects, which we just started noticing that over the last couple of years, which is interesting. And then I'd say over, the last 10, 12 years that I've been doing it, I've seen more involvement on the private equity side now more than ever, meaning these private equity firms that want to come in and purchase businesses. So I guess what this really means is like it's a good time for people to be in the energy efficiency industry because there's a lot of money that's coming into it. The more investment that's coming, the more they need to build out their teams, the more investment that they want to make into talent to meet some of the goals and objectives that they got to hit, especially as it relates to these private equity firms, right? There's going to be some of them that have that long-term view that they're going to look out, 5, 10, maybe that's a long term for private equity, but 5 or 10 years. You got some that are looking at it from a 2 to 3 year turn window. But either way, like we're seeing a lot of that. And that's just, I'd say recently over the past, 12, 18, 24 months. I don't know, Corey, if you want to echo that or what you're seeing from your view.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. I think over the last 12 to 24 months, we've seen a significant level of outside investment and some really big names in the private equity world jump into our space and even in your backyard. And so what I try to advise individuals, and some of those organizations are clients of mine, and it's really about knowing and understanding how that affects the business strategy. Okay, because ultimately when you're considering going to work for an organization, you really want to know and understand how you fit in long term. An organization that's got an aggressive growth strategy that's outlined over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe at most, is going to have a different set of expectations for you than maybe working directly for an institutional customer, maybe going to work for a privately held organization that's looking to invest for a 15, 20-year outlook, et cetera, or a major manufacturer. So know and understand within the private equity space, it's not a negative connotation by any stretch of the imagination, but it may have just a different set of expectations. So I always encourage candidates when they're exploring opportunities to really level set. Hey, how do you judge my success over the next 1 to 2 year time frame? A year from now, how do you say this was a great hire or a bad hire? Those questions are completely appropriate, and I think give even the organization that you're talking to an opportunity to see that you're thinking strategically, how you fit in the mold. Ask you the question, is this a buy and build strategy? Are you looking to exit? Are you looking to maintain? Knowing and understanding what the expectations of the money people are gives you a clearer picture of how that might affect you as a potential employee of that organization. Do you agree, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're probably going to touch on this later on as far as interviewing tips and tactics, but I think that's a good piece to tie in is at least know what you're getting yourself into, because sometimes we'll get calls from candidates and they're like, you know what, they got this private equity money involved here, and maybe they didn't know it, right? Maybe they didn't know it one way or another, but you might be able to get out in front of that during the interview process, finding out who owns the company. Is there private equity involved? Is there a plan to sell, like Corey said? So at least if they're transparent with all that, you know what you're getting yourself into. And depending on your level in your career and what you're looking to do and kind of how long you've been in the industry, it may be appropriate to look at an equity play. If they're saying, hey, we just got purchased by a private equity firm, you look at their track record, traditionally they buy and flip in 3 to 4 years. Okay, at least you're going to be owned by a new company in 3 to 4 years. What is the equity involvement? How do you guys look at that for employees and team members? And you just know full well that, hey, I could be wearing a different jersey in 3 to 4 years.
So you're basically saying to be aware of that and prepare your compensation package and everything you go into that, knowing what that's going to be. So do your research ahead of time. It sounds like is what you're saying.
Yeah, very much so. And don't be afraid to ask those questions.
This may be early, but I know you guys may be hitting on this, but one of the questions that I do have written down is what is the best way to ask those questions? I think that's something that, and that comes from compensation to, any difficult question in general that may come up. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about that or if you have something plugged in for later.
Yeah, well, great question. So one of the areas that we are seeing more and more is whenever you've got outside capital, I will tell, if you guys hear nothing else right now, it is absolutely a candidate's marketplace. It is absolutely an opportunity to be looking around and making sure that you're in the best spot possible. And because it's a candidate's marketplace, you're seeing organizations react to that. There are organizations that have been, in some way, shape, or form, some of them have been in the industry and had some presence in the industry for 20, 30 years. And they're having to look around and say, okay, there's private equity money in play. They're aggressively growing and they're willing to jump up compensation. Do we have to readdress ours? So it's a good time to be looking at, are you in that best spot possible? And I will say on a macro level across the industry, I do see compensation plans being consistently evaluated. There's some changes that have already occurred with some of the major players in the space, and there's some changes that I know will be occurring over the coming weeks and months. And overarching, I will say majority of the changes that I've seen have been very positive for the employees. Jim, would you agree?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh, if you had a follow-up.
I was going to ask, what are you seeing as like two-part question. What are you seeing as like common turnaround times? Like how long are people staying at their current jobs and how long should they be staying? Like if you want to optimize,
Oh yeah, great question.
Yeah.
I
would say, well, this does get into some of the topics that we're going to cover here.
All right.
I think no matter what, even though but I think we can get into it. Even though we're talking about, hey, it's a great time, it's a candidate market. Corey's 100% right. I would still, at the same time, like there are some strategies, there are some avenues that you should be exploring at your current employer first. So from a recruiter perspective, when we look at a resume and someone has had 5 jobs in the last 8 years, that's not a good thing. So if you're constantly chasing the next equity play, if you're constantly chasing the next 10% increase or 50% increase on salary, sure, okay, that may happen, that may be available to you, but I think long-term, you got to think strategically as well. So I wouldn't put like a firm number around it, but Josh, when I look at someone's resume and they've had 2 jobs over 10 years, that looks a lot better than 7 jobs over 10 years. So that's typically what we look for, maybe that 4 to 5 years per stint that you're at. And occasionally we look at resumes all day long. And occasionally there's always someone that had, 5 years here, 4 years here, and then they had a year and then they had another 4. Okay, well, what happened there? Oh, well, the company was sold, position was eliminated. All right. So that's explainable versus like somebody that shows that as a pattern. If it happens one time, it's an event. If it happens twice, it usually is a pattern. So those are the things that we typically look for. So even though we're talking so much about candidate market and investment, still think strategically. I would still advise to think strategically and don't just jump at the money.
Wholeheartedly. I would echo everything that Jim has to say. And to your point, Josh, I would tell you there's not a hard and fast rule. I kind of, when I look at a resume, when I'm looking in and having a discussion with a candidate, when I start seeing multiple transitions, multiple short stints, and I'll call a short stint, sub 2 to 3 years, right? Especially given the sales cycle and the nature of the business that it operates within the energy space, you kind of get one before I start really digging in and being a little bit more concerned. Is this an individual problem, or did we just, hey, we all make mistakes. We all, there's all sorts of outside influences and opportunities where you could be the best person in the world at your role and your function, and you could have been eliminated for a variety of reasons, or might not have worked for a variety of reasons. Once I have to start getting that clarity 2-3 times over your career, especially if it's a shorter scenario, it does hurt you. It really does.
What about too long? Yeah. How long is too long on the other side of things?
I wanted to jump in on that because it's such a balance, right? It's such a balance. We don't want to, work with somebody who's had, a job every year or 2 years. But yeah, at what point are you, Brooks from Shawshank Redemption, where you've become institutionalized, right? That might be like the 20-year mark, right? If someone's been with the same company for 20 plus years, 25, that at that point, it's like, all right, are they stuck in their way? And that may not be the case. We want to evaluate it and get to know the person, of course. But yeah, some of those tendencies do come in. They might be really firmly branded by that company and not be open to looking at something else that doing things a different way. So I wouldn't put a firm number on it, but I look at 18 to 20 years, if they've been there that long, it's like, okay, are they really going to be able to adapt to a new environment? But it's always worth having the conversation about.
So 10 years would not be bad then. Sorry, whoever jumped in, go ahead.
Josh, I was going to reply to Jim there. This is Brooks speaking, because I've been at my current company for 22 years. And, up until about 4 or 5 years ago, I was getting calls from your firm like weekly or monthly with new opportunities. And, I checked into a few of them and never made a move. I'm wondering if somebody's algorithm has now written me out of being contacted, or is it really something like that where you see somebody is so entrenched at an organization that you're not going to follow up with them for new opportunities?
Great question. It's actually something that we're going to touch on. The way that our business has been done, and when I say our business, the recruiting business overall, just as much as technology is transforming the world around us, specifically as it relates to technology in the recruiting space, has transformed significantly over the last 10 years. So it is something that we'll touch on here shortly. The short answer is yes, there are algorithms that are making you less likely to be contacted, not on our end, purely, truly. And one of the areas that we're going to touch on is very much LinkedIn, because there's a lot of counterintuitiveness to how you are ranked. LinkedIn has its own search engine optimization that is not based on your fit, your skill set. And so there are areas and there are ways to increase that. As it relates to overarching, I don't have necessarily a negative perception by any stretch of the imagination if someone's got a long tenure. It's how they communicate that. Okay, so if someone's in the same role for 20 years, is that because they found their spot? That's what they're happy doing and that's what they want to do? Okay, know and understand that I need to find something, if I was working on that candidate's behalf, find something that's going to be very similar, relatively plug and play. And those happen, those occur. They may not. Are they doing it because they had 5 different, 6, 7 different roles of increased responsibility in that 20 years? That's not a negative thing at all by any stretch.
Agreed.
There's a lot more to that story. Does that kind of give you a little bit of clarity? And feel free. I'm going to touch on the technology and the algorithm pieces here in a few minutes. If you've got further questions after that, please pop in.
It really does. Thank you, Corey. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. COVID. I mean, you can't turn the news on without knowing and understanding it's affecting businesses every single day. And those of you that are currently, employed out there working in the marketplace, you know full well your office dynamic, if you're even back to an office dynamic, has changed drastically. This is an interesting scenario because at first, I think, at least from my perspective, it looked like it was going to be really revolutionary in the way that we do work. I think it was going to force organizations to really figure out a new way to do their business model. And it was really trending towards, okay, this is going to be transformative. The whole idea of having people come into the office every day, is that going to go away? I'm hearing more, especially over the last probably 3 months or so, even within clients within the state of California, where they are frustrated organizations are frustrated because they're looking at the overarching efficiency, the overarching results, and doubting if they're getting the same level of value versus the way they used to do things. Jim, would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I talk with candidates about this and clients about this whole scenario, I think we got clients or companies that are falling into like different categories as it relates to COVID. We have certain companies that are saying, hey, come back to the office, please. This is the way that we're going to do business. If you can't, if you have certain medical restrictions, then of course we want to work with you. But our expectation is for you to come back to the office, and they're putting their ground that they're drawing the line, which is probably causing people to leave, which is something we're going to talk about as well. So that is causing an outward trend. Then you have some companies that are saying, hey, you know what? We were spending X amount of dollars leasing office space. Shoot, we don't need that much space anymore. So everybody can work. If you want to work remote, you can work remote. If you want to do, I think what's happening, like I just interviewed a guy from JLL for the podcast, and that's really the world that he's in right now, is this whole like remote working scenario, because not everybody who has the ability to work from home wants to do it. But like I had a year of that working at the kitchen table with my spouse, and that was miserable. I want an office to go to, right? So I think a lot of these companies are creating environments where they can go to an office and rent out pods, if you will, versus having like multiple floors in a commercial office building. So kind of adapting to it, which also ties into this overall like hybrid model too, that a lot of companies are adopting, is like, you want to work from home a couple days a week? Great. You want to come into the office? Let's do 3 days in the office, 2 days from home. Is that good with everyone? Okay, that's an option too. So I think there's like these three different camps that companies are falling into. I guess that's what's creating that's the situation from COVID. I don't know. Still a strange time.
It is. I think, and again, every day there's new potential policy implications. We all know there's been some potential mandates on the federal level that are in relation to vaccines, and it's going to cause a continued disruption in the labor force. There's individuals that are adamantly one way or another, and so you're seeing social issues or choice issues, or however you would like to deem it, really affecting an organization, affecting an individual's employment status. It's already a problem. I mean, just the day after the most recent federal announcement, I can't tell you how many individuals I was counseling as it relates to how's this going to affect me. I have an offer that's in hand that an individual is literally waiting to see a client's official policy as it relates to vaccine status. I never would have imagined 2 years ago that would be a question that we would have to address.
I have a question.
Please.
So I am a student still, and it's kind of like a sidestep from what you guys are talking about, but I'm kind of curious. I am interested in the energy industry, but I'm not completely sure what that entails. Like, what do people do in the energy industry? Like, I have an idea of what it is, but of course I also don't really know the reality of it.
First of all, kudos to you. You're already taking the first step. You're already taking the right steps in getting involved in an organization like AEE, and getting involved in and taking the time out of your day to participate in something like this. What I would tell you is, frankly and honestly, I saw a little bit earlier some of the networking events and things that Josh and team here have set up. I would strongly encourage you to go to those. And there's other associations that are energy related, and go to as many of those as you can, and talk to individuals that are, you've already heard from individuals that are at midpoint in their career, 10, 15, 20 years here. They have seen it, lived it, and they can give you an idea of what their day-to-day looks like. And if I've learned nothing else for the last 10 years of doing this, I can tell you one thing with certainty. The vast majority of people love talking about themselves and love sharing what they've spent their career doing. And so going there and really just saying, hey, I'm a student. This is something that interests me, but what paths are available? How did you come up? What opportunities does your organization have? I will tell you, you'll learn more than you would care to know, and it will open doors for you. So kudos again. You're doing exactly it, and can specifically those opportunities, if you can get FaceTime, if you're comfortable, if those opportunities are available to you, do it, because sitting down face to face with someone is a great opportunity to learn that.
Right. Yeah, I definitely plan on going to those events, which is why in the chat I asked if those events will be sent an email. I don't believe I'm on your guys' emailing list. I got the email for this event through Dr. Alexander.
Well, just send your email to me on the chat and I'll get you involved, or I'll get you on a list.
Thank you.
The last thing on the trending side, what I will tell you is more and more I'm being asked by clients, and this has been a trend over the last few years, is specifically to further vet out some of the soft skills. I think the age of being really, really great at one technical application is becoming more difficult for organizations to capitalize on. The concept, I'm having more and more organizations, really even within a highly technical engineering role, ask for and really qualify and really compare someone's ability to be put in front of a customer, someone's ability to be part of a sales process and interact with. I will tell you, Selena, I'll speak to you and others that may or may not be speaking up here. If you have each and every opportunity, if you're highly technical in nature, if you're going for your engineering degree, spend the time also developing some of those soft skills, some of those people, interpersonal skills, those customer and business related skills. It will serve you very, very well. It will set you apart. Those that don't, I think, are going to continue to be limited in terms of the opportunities and the career paths that are available to them. Jim,
hey, Corey,
I
was going to ask, can you give some examples of, like, for people, because I think this is something that is probably applicable to our group. Can you give examples of, like, how to do that, or the best, like, if there's trainings or classes, or what's the best way to develop some of those soft skills if you're not naturally inclined in that direction?
Honestly, it's going to seem a little bit similar to some of the things that I just spoke to, but taking those opportunities to go out to those low impact networking events. I mean, taking those opportunities to go out there and force yourself into a position of uncomfort where your job, your career, your livelihood doesn't rely on it. You know what? What's the worst? You go to a networking event and you feel awkward and uncomfortable and the conversation went bad. So what? Who cares? You go to another one and you've got a whole new room full of people. It's not going to hurt you. Take those opportunities and remind yourself it's a low impact scenario to test your skills, to try it out. And the only way that you're going to be able to do it is trying it, doing it, trial and error. I've heard of individuals, I've never personally got involved in it. I've seen individuals do things like Toastmasters and things like that, where it's more of a structured environment. I've never been involved in it personally. I've interacted with candidates that have and seem to have had positive outcomes, but I wouldn't be able to speak personally to how it goes, what it costs, whether it's a worthwhile investment, et cetera. Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. Like, it's all about just getting reps in, right? It's all about just getting out there as much as you can, because, yeah, those first initial conversations, yeah, you might stumble through it a little bit, but, yeah, the more reps you get, the more comfortable that you'll be. And I know there's an old adage, like, be more interested versus trying to be interesting, right? So when you're in those interactions, call it networking, whatever, right, you want to be naturally curious. You want to get to know, you don't want to be, interrogating somebody, but asking questions in a very sincere and curious way, getting to know them. Like Corey said earlier, people love talking about themselves. So I think, Josh, and just in general, right, you just, when you're in those situations, just see if you could find out about the person, ask a lot of what I would say, like, what and how questions, like, hey, how did you get into the industry? What do you find interesting about it, right? That takes the pressure off a little bit. And I think you got some natural conversation that's going to flow from there. And I would add too, like, on this the whole soft skills topic and in highly technical roles, I think just in general, like when you're interviewing, the technical piece is only one leg of what I would call like a three-legged stool when you're being interviewed and you're involved. Like, you got to be able to do the job, right? You got to have the right skills that they're looking for, which is, it's going to be on your resume. It's going to be through your education. It's going to be through your previous experience, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. Like, two is I would just call like overall career fit. So let's say it's a director of engineering person that's now interviewing for a mid-level engineering role. Like, is this really the right fit for you? Yeah, you got the technical skills. Like, yeah, you can do the job, but why are you interested in this? You've been out of work for how long? Right. So the career fit part, like, companies are looking for that too. Is this the next step for you in your career? Do you have the right skill to do it? And then the third leg of the stool, what I would say is the most complex equation out of all of them. Do they like you? That's the soft skill part. Do they like you? Like, when you walk out of the room, like, hey, that's a nice person. They came across well. They came across prepared. I could see myself, like, I don't like doing the whole, I could have a beer with that person. It's like, can you just have a conversation with them? Are they a nice person? Right. So do they like you? And I think as long as you go in prepared, as long as you be yourself, like, they're going to like who you are, as long as you're not coming across as, too arrogant or anything like that. So I think that's just one piece to look at, just the soft skill and technical equation.
So would you say for an engineering role is fairly technical of the roles out there? So for even a role like that, are you saying that the hard engineering skills are going to be valued equivalently to the soft skills, and do they like you and that sort of thing? It's not one, I mean, they're valued basically about the same?
I would say, like, you're bringing, so yes, there's still going to be plenty of individuals that get careers and get jobs. I just think you're bringing more value to the table, and you're separating yourself more from the rest of the candidate pool when you have those other aspects. So maybe the three-legged stool isn't the best analogy. I don't know if they're all equally weighted, but I do think, like, in a competitive scenario and ultimately bringing more value to the company, like, those soft skills are being weighted as well.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately,
that's the way I look at it.
I'd agree wholeheartedly. Two candidates of equal value, technically speaking, the one that has the better set of soft skills is absolutely getting the job. There's no question, right? It's that piece that's going to put, and honestly, I've seen those that may have slightly less technical, but those soft skills get the job over the more technical person very frequently.
Yeah, I mean, I hear all the time from places I've worked that you can teach the technical part, you can't teach personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can develop, you can refine. So
you can't teach culture, right? I think that's like another way of saying, like, do they like you? Do you fit the culture, right? You can't really, like, coach somebody into being a cultural fit. At least that's my philosophy on it. Like, there has to be some of those inherent, like, personality traits that people are just going to mesh well in certain environments. But yeah, maybe more transactional, and maybe it's just I can only speak to my client base. Maybe there's more companies or clients out there that are more transactional. Like, I don't care if this guy's a jerk. He's got the best coding experience in the country. Let's frickin' hire him. So that happens all day, right? I'm not saying that, but just from my viewpoint.
So on that note, for those that are employed or are within their, with the current organization, we really wanted to touch on some of these things that we believe are critical in the early stages while you're employed. Jim, you want to go through the staying relevant scenario?
Yeah, so this ties back to, like, the conversation that we were having about, hey, just because there's a lot of money, just because it's a candidate's market, doesn't mean that you got to be jumping every time there's an opportunity. And I think, Tim, this may touch on, like, your question. I think the important part, whether you're there for 5 years, 10 years, or 25 years, like, are you progressing throughout the company? Are you looking for opportunities to grow? Are you advancing in not only, like, the skill and certification side of your career, but are you also looking for more opportunities for responsibility? So I think that's where, like, the be so good that you can't be ignored comes into play, and the value that you're bringing. So how to answer this question, how to stay relevant, is, like, really work so hard at your company and bring so much value that you're going to have opportunities to ask for. So the ask part, if you find yourself in a position where you're like, man, I feel like I'm being undercompensated, I feel like I'm being underpaid, how confident are you going back to your boss and asking for a raise? Well, if you're so good at your job that you're not being ignored, you're going to have a lot of negotiation power in going into that conversation to ask for an incremental raise and believe that you're being brought up to what you believe is fair market value. And I think overall, I recommend this strategy, like, when we're talking with candidates, and this may sound counterintuitive, you might think, oh, the recruiters advising me to do what? Doesn't he want to work with me? My advice always is to go back to your boss first and ask for a raise. Don't go out on the open market to test your value, to go through an interview process only to put that back in front of your boss with an offer and say, hey, boss, I got this offer. Can you match it? That's like the worst thing you could do. That's the worst strategy that you can have. Like, have that conversation with your boss, be very upfront about it and just ask him, hey, this is what I've been doing. This is the bring a business case scenario to the table. So this is what I've been able to get accomplished. This is my sales number if you're in sales or whatever. Like, here's what I'm looking for. How can we get there? And then if they brush you off, they're like, hey, it's not in the budget. No. Like, if you feel like, hey, this isn't happening, now we got an opportunity to test the market. So that's just the strategy that I always recommend when it comes to compensation increases. And that's only after you've been there for a substantial amount of time.
Let's say that you do that and you do ask for that and you talk to your boss and, obviously if they give you the raise, that's the goal. You're done. You're good to go. What happens in a scenario where, and we know that if they say no, you're probably looking, but what if they give you lip service or, they tell you that, you're obviously very valuable. They see your value, but they're going to wait 3 months or, for whatever reason, they can't do it. How long do you wait? And how much leeway do you give them before you start testing the market?
Well, in that example, if it's 3 months, if they're like, hey, we're going to revisit it at the end of the quarter. All right, let's pull out our calendars. What date works for you? Let's schedule it. Because it tends to be a kick the can down the road response, right? The way that you just posed that was like, that's probably like they're not serious about it. They're just trying to buy themselves some time.
Right. We might have lost you.
Nope. Yep, we might have lost Jim. So on that, yeah. Oh, you there?
Can you hear me?
Okay, I think you're back. Yep, you're back.
All right. Internet here. So in that scenario, like just their seriousness, like okay, boss, you got a lot going on. We got a lot going on this quarter. How about this date? Let's set aside some time because this is something that's really important to me. I don't want to test the market. I do want to be here. And at the same time, I do feel like my compensation is being undervalued. So I'd like to revisit this conversation. Maybe we can bring HR involved as well. Let's send out a calendar invite. I would just make it firm.
Yeah, I think most of the members of this chapter, be so good you can't be ignored. I think most people here are probably so good they can't be ignored. I think as most of us being engineers, we do what we're going to say. I would think, and I don't want to speak for anyone on the call, but I would think that what is difficult for this group would be that asking for what you want. And so could you go into more detail about like, not just at a high level of how to do it, but like, what would you actually say? Would you come in with, what you've accomplished and present that, or what would you actually like detail to do and how would you ask for that? And what's the appropriate way to ask for that raise, or just even have that conversation, how to initiate that conversation?
Yeah, Corey, do you want to take it?
Yeah. What I would tell you is, a couple things on that note. Number one is know and understand every organization is different, how organizations are structured to respond to those requests, et cetera. There are legitimate reasons why you might get that answer that, hey, can we revisit this in 3 months? As it relates to how do you present that, I will tell you this is a overgeneralization, but by and large, I find that individuals with a technical background and individuals with an engineering background want validity before they're making an ask, want an understanding of testing the market, right? So what Jim's saying is, don't go out and test the market first, ask first. There's ways to play a little bit of go between. Look around your peer group, look around and know and understand, okay, Josh, is there someone, a former colleague at another organization in a similar role that you can kind of test and say, hey, I'm feeling a little underpaid. Where do you see individuals being compensated? A former mentor, call us up, call up another recruiter and really just see. Someone calls me up and say, hey, what do you think my market value is? I'm going to take the call because ultimately it's a low impact opportunity for me to advise you. And then if you don't get the answer that you want, or your organization doesn't respond in kind, you're going to come then and say, hey, they didn't respond the way that I like, it's time for me to move on. I would much rather have a candidate that has made that decision mentally, that it's time for them to move on, versus, as Jim said, they're using it as an opportunity to go test the water and bring back an offer for a counter offer. you might get the answer that you want, bringing an offer to the table. I can tell you all day, you can Google it, look at any statistic in the world. That's the biggest way to end your career with your organization, because they're making a knee-jerk reaction because they're backed into a corner, and it's cheaper to give you this than it is for them to replace you. And not because they think that agree or disagree with fair market value. They have no other option at that point. And no one wants to be in a position that they're forced to make a move versus that they've decided this is what's right. Does that kind of answer your question, Josh?
Yeah, the big takeaway being have a conversation with your boss before you go out to market. But I think delving into that a little bit more, what is the best way to ask those tough and sticky questions, right? Like, what preparation should people be doing to ask those difficult questions, and what's the best way to phrase that potentially so that you're not going to be disrespectful? Because this is something that we as engineers probably struggle with more than technical side of things.
Yeah, I would say as long as you're taking like a humble approach to it, like you're not going in there with like, hey, boss, I need a raise, and here's all the 17 reasons why. I think just scheduling a call with them, like, hey, I got something that's been on my mind here. It's really been weighing on me. I would like to discuss compensation increase. Can we set aside some time, 30 minutes on Tuesday at this time? And then you can go into that call like, hey, here's why I'm struggling with it. I've talked with some other folks that have similar backgrounds that I do, bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. We got about 5 years of experience that are in the industry. And, I'm sitting here making $72,000. And what I'm hearing in the market is really like 85. And it's not that I just feel like, oh, I'm so underpaid, but plus at the same time, like, look at these projects that we've completed. And you can kind of like go through it like, man, I was instrumental here. Great. Yeah. Like, yeah, you were. Like, you were really helpful on that project. I thought so. I thought I was bringing a lot of value there. Yeah. You know what? You really were. All right. So here's what I'd like to ask. And then just be really firm. So I think you go in with humility. You go in with a couple of like anecdotal data points, that information you found from other colleagues, or, information that you found from folks that are in the industry. I really feel like this is why I'm looking for it. I'd like to be brought up at $80,000. What's the likelihood? How likely would that be? And who besides yourself would need to be involved in signing off on that? So what you want to do is professionally avoid them kicking the can down the road, because that is, to your point, Josh, it is an uncomfortable conversation for you and for them, and they may not be able to make that call. So I would just ask them like, hey, who else besides yourself would need to be involved in signing off on a situation like this? Oh, is it HR, or it's your boss, the vice president, or the CEO? Okay, I know how these things go. Can we schedule a call in a week? I don't want this thing to get kicked into next year. Can we schedule a call next week, where maybe all four of us can get on a call? They can hear where I'm coming from, and we can come up with a solution here. How does that sound?
Yeah.
I think just that tonality, that pace, I think just taking a real humble approach with it, I think is going to be well received.
In the scenario he just described, I would also say, if you're dealing with it's not their decision, they may want to be able to make that decision. They may want to support that decision if they value you, and they may want to work with you to get that accomplished. Because if you leave, their job becomes harder. If you go elsewhere, their job becomes harder. So if it's not their decision, if they are saying, hey, I need approval from X, Y, and Z individuals, hey, how do we work together to get this accomplished? Because I really don't want to, I really want to be a part of your team and continue to grow alongside you. They'll be your ally.
Yeah, I think that approach versus a threat. Yeah, nobody wants a threat. Nobody wants to respond while they're being backed into a corner, right? Which is the whole counteroffer scenario we're talking about before. That's kind of like, nobody wants that situation. So yes, I think that's, Josh, I don't know if that's helpful. I'm trying to be as tactical as possible here.
Absolutely. One other question. What if you find yourself in a situation where you mentioned that you want to stay at least, 4 or 5 years, but you find yourself in a situation where you are paid under value? Should you stick around, even if you're not making headway in terms of making it towards market value, just so you have that years on your resume?
Well, I'd say no. I'd say no, assuming that's the first time you've made that transition. If you're on job 3 in year 5, you might have to, because your reputation is at stake at that point. The credibility of your value is at stake at that point. So you're saying, I'm under fair market value. I'm going to tell you, if you're looking for your fourth job in 5 years, no, you're not, because you're a high risk hire for me. And your fair market value is directly correlated with the risk as it relates to employing you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Shall we move on?
The only other thing I would say is, as a recruiter working outside, one thing Jim touched on it, and one thing I will say, well, I've heard this, there's no training or development or career advancement opportunities. Okay, that happens. Have you asked for them? Oh, well, no, it's just they don't have those available. Well, if you haven't cited that it's an importance to you, should the organization be proactive about that? Absolutely. But you want to give your organization, that employer, the opportunity to address that concern before you go into an interview and say, why are you looking to make a move? They haven't given me training opportunities. Any logical person on the other side of that desk is going to ask you, what have you done to ask for that? What have you done to position that? Have you been denied, declined, et cetera? Because they're putting themselves in the shoes of your current employer and saying, am I going to be running into this same issue 2, 3, 4 years down the road? On that note, I'm going to touch on this quickly. You said, Josh, you've made that transition, you're undervalued, do you stick it out? I will tell you, one of the worst things I've seen individuals do is, you ever hear the statement, don't shop hungry, right? Don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry. Why? Because you make knee-jerk reactions. You make moves out of desperation, out of what sounds good in the moment. Don't wait till things are completely unbearable. Don't wait till you see the business collapsing around you, you see your boss going on a downward spiral, to know and understand what else is out there. I have clients all day long that are absolutely interested in just networking with their competition and just getting an opportunity to build that foundation, build that bench. And so individuals think that this whole idea of sitting down with a peer at a competitor, sitting down with a hiring manager from a competitor, is this cardinal sin. What I would tell you is, if you set the expectation that you're not actively looking, that you're always open to exploring, but really there's nothing that's painful. There's nothing that I'm running from. If the organization still wants to have a meeting, do it. You've set the right expectation up front, and then that's your opportunity to assess your fair market value, to assess, is the grass potentially greener. And you don't know how good or bad you have it until you realize what else is out there. And I see so many people have full blinders on, and you're not making an informed decision at that point. You're creating an environment where you're a victim of your own circumstance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
This piece speaks to the question earlier about algorithms. Our industry is evolving significantly. LinkedIn, if you guys haven't been understood at this point, LinkedIn is absolutely trying to take over and revolutionize the entire job search, hiring, interviewing, even resume world. If you go out on LinkedIn, you can literally apply for jobs with just your LinkedIn today. They're making an active and a very successful push to be a critical component of each and every hire in the professional world out there. And so what I want to be advising individuals here, a couple things. Number one, frankly, your resume, if you have a resume, you can literally copy and paste it and build your LinkedIn. They should mirror each other. And same thing, if you've got a LinkedIn, but you haven't updated your resume in 18,000 years, if you don't know, there's literally a function on each and every person's LinkedIn that you can automatically export it to a PDF, and it actually formats it for you almost identical to a resume. I've gotten multiple individuals hired before or throughout the years, every year, where that is their quote unquote resume. So know and understand that the technology and familiarity with it is important, and that should be, consider your LinkedIn is very likely over the next 5 to 10 years going to be replacement or at least equally valued as your resume. I've had clients that have literally said if they're not active on LinkedIn, it demonstrates to me that they're not with today. They're not with where technology is going today, and I'm not interested in them.
If there was like two or three things that you would say that everyone should look at immediately to do on their LinkedIn, like what are like two or three things that all of us should be doing that we maybe aren't doing? Like the two or three biggest things.
Honestly, the biggest way that you can make an impact is A, make sure it's up to date, but B, and this sounds counterintuitive, we all get, LinkedIn is getting more and more filled with spam. Okay, you get those unsolicited messages that they clearly didn't look at your background at all. They don't know what you're clearly mistargeted and it was just a mass email. Reply to it. And here's why. This specifically goes to the algorithm question. LinkedIn has a very expensive, very elaborate tool that internal and external recruiters is the standard in our business. Okay, we pay a premium to use what's called a program that's called LinkedIn Recruiter, and everyone out there does. Okay, LinkedIn Recruiter has its own search engine optimization. So I can type in, hey, I'm looking for an energy engineer in Northern California with this many years of experience, and it's going to give me a qualified set of results. How you are ranked on those results is extremely heavily weighted on your likelihood to respond. Okay, so the people at the top of my list, the top of my results, aren't necessarily the people that are the most qualified. They are literally the people that are most likely to respond. So to the question earlier about algorithms, you should, if the biggest impact that you can make sure it's fully completed and take each and every opportunity to even reply with a couple of words quickly. It will bump you up on those results and you're more likely to be seen and reached out to.
What if you say something like, no, I'm not interested? Would that still count towards the algorithm?
Absolutely, because you're responding. It's literally the qualifier, are you likely to respond?
Does it take into account how fast you respond, or is it just a response? I.e.,
yes.
Like if I respond in a day or a month, does that matter?
From what I have been told by our LinkedIn representatives, from what I understand of the algorithm, and I have never seen the back end of the algorithm, but I have seen the results that have been, you can run a search on Recruiter versus regular LinkedIn and see the difference. I literally actually did a training on it this morning with some members of our team. It is limited and it is very much affecting the results. You're still going to show up, but you may be on page 8, 9, 10, depending on how large the search is. And someone who may be a job hopper, maybe the kind of candidate that I wouldn't want to represent, might be number one, purely and truly because they reply.
But does the time matter? Like, because all of us are busy. Do I have to reply within a day, or can I reply in 3 weeks?
I would tell you, you've got a job to do, okay? And it's not tracking LinkedIn. I have been told that yes, it does impact, but guess what? Even if it's 3 weeks, you're still checking the box yes. So is that weighted less? Probably, but you're still moving yourself incrementally up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So my takeaways, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaways from this are make sure you're up to date. How often are you updating that? Are you updating your LinkedIn to match every 6 months? Are you doing it once a year? How often monthly?
It depends on how your role and responsibilities are changing. It depends on how your role and responsibilities are changing. I don't know, if you're in the same role, if you're in the same function for a 3-year period of time, do you need to be changing a word every 6 months? No, absolutely not. But what can you do to show activity? Posts, likes, comments. The weird integration that's kind of going on right now between what we used to think of as like the Facebook, hey, people are posting articles and commenting back and forth. That does also influence your activity level on LinkedIn, and so it is going to move yourself up on those results.
Keep your LinkedIn up to date.
Go ahead. The other thing I would say, people, lots of words is not a good thing, guys. As you all are well aware, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, right? The worst thing that you can do is have 3 paragraphs that can really be summarized by 2 lines. Okay, know and understand what your audience is really looking for there. Your audience is trying to understand what kind of impact that you're going to make for their organization. So, if you're in sales, obviously, whatever that's not confidential that you can share about your sales performance. You know, if your organization is frowns upon you sharing sales numbers, fine, share your percentage of plan, share your incremental growth. If you're in engineering and you're assigned a certain level of workload, if you're assigned a certain level of project complexity, if you've got a flagship project that just got won and your name's on it, post a press release, put it up on there. You can link your projects through to your LinkedIn. That stuff is much more important to me than how you describe your day-to-day functionality of this, that, and the other. Results matter. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I would much rather have someone that's got 3 sentences that describes their function, regardless of how long that they've been in it, as long as it's focused on the results and the impact that they're making on the organization. We're looking at, and every internal recruiter is looking at dozens and dozens and dozens of resumes. The way you stand apart is the one where I don't have to go digging for the information that I'm looking for.
You've mentioned LinkedIn a good amount. Is that the best? Let's say that we're in a situation now where I'm looking, I want to explore the market. Is LinkedIn the best way? Is going through a recruiter, directly to companies, your own personal networking? What's the best method?
All of the above. And here's why. So the little known secret, I think people have to remember, recruiters are there to represent the clients, okay? And so our clients are the organizations that we represent. The organizations that we represent have to, especially if you're a niche recruiter, we have to pick and choose who we can and cannot represent. And I will absolutely, Josh, you called me up tomorrow and said, Corey, you know, I'm looking for opportunities. Where can you help me? I'll list out the organizations that if you're interested in, I don't have a relationship with them intentionally. And so therefore, you know, here, I can't help you there. Any recruiter that's unwilling or unable to do that, any recruiter that's trying to charge you, a candidate, a fee, run far, far away from. There's a lot of, given that it's a candidate's market, you're seeing a lot of ebbs and flows, a lot of individuals jumping into the space, and no one understand, do they get the business that you're in? Do they get the time that you're in? And is there just transparency and communication? I would tell you, I will tell every candidate that calls me that says I'm looking, I can't be your entire toolbox. I can be a tool in the toolbox. You need to have a multi-pronged approach if you're really dedicated to making the best move. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Jim, your thoughts?
No, I think that's really good. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, Josh. I know we're just over an hour. Do we want to start wrapping up?
I think we were going to go for about 15 more minutes if you guys are available.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we have this and one more slide, and then I have a couple of questions that I can keep asking if you guys aren't sick of me.
Yeah, we're great.
Never. Yeah, let's go to you want to go to the next one, Corey? Or you got a few things to finish up here?
Yeah, I think we talked technology. And again, set a clear expectation. Be genuine in your intent and actions. If you're calling me up and saying, hey, I really want to just see what my fair market value is, I'll tell you. I'll give you the opportunity to do that. If you're looking to network with an organization, but you're not intentional about making a move, be clear and upfront about that. And then finally, if you are making a move, Josh, if you've got a family at home, you've got a spouse, you've got a significant other, whoever your influencers are in this move, sit down and really discuss what's important to you in this move, because not every organization can be all things to all people. And what your priorities in life are, we really do try to take that into account when we're trying to help you find that fit. And if you're waiting to explore that until you've got an offer in hand, it doesn't make for a recipe for success. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then, Jim, this is if you want to touch on some of the areas as it relates to once you're actually in the interview process.
Yeah. So I think this first bullet point here, I think we've talked about quite a bit already. Just the whole idea of not leveraging an offer just to get a raise. Like, be sincere, as Corey's point before. Like, be sincere with your intentions going through the interview process. Now, once you get there, like you talk about research, I think that ties into the other bullet point there about questions that you should be prepared to ask. So just real baseline stuff, like know who you're interviewing with. Take a look at their LinkedIn profiles. Take a look at, like, not just the website, of course, everyone gets on their website, but maybe look at Maybe look at case studies, specific projects, and that can tie into some questions, intelligent, research-driven questions that you're going to ask. So just to tie it to, let's take energy performance contracting. Josh, if you're interviewing a project development engineer for your team, and he says, hey, I saw that you guys just won a job at Arizona State, I don't know, pick a university. And the ECMs that you guys implemented here were solar, LED lighting, and there's a cogeneration plant. What was your level of involvement on the cogeneration plant, Josh? Were you involved in designing that, or how much involvement did your team have? A question like that, you might think, wow, okay, this guy did his homework. This gal did her homework. Like, yeah, she did some research. So that's just an example of like the type of question that will show sincere interest, that this person is really, they're not wasting my time. They're not going through the interview process just to see what their value is going to be at the end. They have sincere intentions based on the research that they've done. If they're a publicly traded company, if you're interviewing at a publicly traded company, even better, because you could dig into the 10K report. There's all sorts of information that needs to be public, that if you want to spend a little bit of extra time looking at, hey, I noticed that your earnings were down for 3 quarters in a row. I don't mean to be a doomsday whisperer here, but what would you point to? What's going on? I'm curious about that. So just another example based on like a research-driven question. Now, as far as pitfalls, like, we're going to send out some information after this, but like, I did a video on like a YouTube video on the top 5 interview mistakes that people can check out after this. But, really what it comes down to is like talking too much. I'd say that is one of the most common reasons when we hear back from a hiring manager, hey, we're not moving forward with this candidate. They just talked in circles. They were a bit long-winded. That's what we would hear. They were a bit long-winded. And being long-winded ties back to not being prepared. Has anyone ever asked you a question that you really weren't prepared for and you felt like you were stumbling and you just kept talking and talking and talking, hoping that you were going to find the answer along the way? Don't do that, right? And you can avoid doing that by being more confident and having some of these questions prepared that that are coming down the pipeline. Like, most interviewers, most hiring managers are going to ask like situational based questions. Tell me about a time when you had to handle a conflict with a fellow employee. Tell me about a time when you had to handle a conflict with a client. So those situational based questions, if someone's not ready for it, if they haven't like cycled through some personal case studies, they're going to stumble and they're going to start getting long-winded and they're not going to give a very short, succinct answer. So what I usually recommend for those situational-based questions, the scenario-based questions that you're going to get asked, is to structure it in a really simple format that you've probably heard. It's called the STAR method. It's an acronym. So the S stands for situation, the T stands for task, the A stands for action, and the R stands for result. So let's say you're a project manager or project engineer, you're interviewing for one of those jobs, and the hiring manager asks you, like, hey, what was one of the most difficult projects that you ever had to manage or lead, and what was that like? All right, so we had a $30 million energy service performance contracting project in the Northeast, and it was exact opposite of what you wanted. It was overtime and off budget, and it was an absolute disaster. We had multiple superintendents walking off the job. I was tasked with getting the job back on budget and back on timeline. So what I ended up doing, the actions that I took, what I ended up doing was I hired a new superintendent, I fired a subcontractor, hired a new one, and ultimately we got the job back on project or back on timeline, and we were able to fulfill the customer's needs. It's a very simple, vanilla example, but hopefully you get the point that if you can structure your answer within that method, it'll allow you to have succinct answers, and the hiring manager will appreciate this. Like, wow, they were able to put a strong case study together, and this is how they could do this. That's the question that they're asking themselves behind the scenes, is like, what type of employee am I potentially getting here? Somebody who's going to make excuses and point the fingers, oh, the project sucked, I had a bad superintendent, or do they come up with solutions? Right. So if you're coming up with solutions, you're providing case studies on how you came up with solutions, you didn't point fingers, you bore the responsibility as the project manager or project engineer, and this is how now the hiring manager is thinking, oh man, I'm getting somebody who's accountable. I'm getting somebody who isn't going to point fingers. I'm going to get somebody that's going to see the result to the end. So that all ties into like the types of questions to be prepared for. And then, one of the questions that I always recommend asking, like, and this may be hard, Josh, I know it sounds like most of the audience here is engineers.
For the most part.
Okay. one of the toughest questions to ask for an engineer in an interview is some sort of closing question. So I'm always cautious with this. Is like, you're not a salesperson. You're not going to ask for the job. That's okay. But if you just frame it up, you want to know where you stand at the end. And there's a very sincere way of doing that without sounding salesy, without sounding too aggressive. You just say, hey, Bob, really enjoyed the last hour that we've been on the call here. Is there any reason why I wouldn't be moving forward in the process? That sounds aggressive. That sounds like you're putting them on the spot. But I think if it's done with a sincere tone, if it's done with like, hey, I've really enjoyed this, like, what would the next step look like? And is there any reason why I wouldn't be moving forward with it? You want to remove the ambiguity, is my recommendation.
And in some cases, I've literally seen that given someone an opportunity to address a concern. And that last step, hey, there's something that's stuck in the hiring manager's mind that didn't sit right with them. You might have an opportunity to make that right and turn that no callback to your next career move.
Taking a quick step back, Jim, you were talking about researching companies. What is the best source of information, and like what are the two or three things that I like absolutely should be looking for? Like, I think people are probably Googling the website and Googling or the company name and seeing what comes up, but what's a better targeted way of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I put that together, when I put research, I think that ties to the individual that you're interviewing with as well. Like that all ties into like know who you're interviewing with, and that ties back to LinkedIn. All right, let's look at their LinkedIn profile. What is their career progression? Where do they go to school? What are they interested in? And I think you can utilize that research not in like a cheesy way, but it can allow you to feel more comfortable going into the call and knowing what this person's background is. So I think that's an important part, is just understanding who you're interviewing with. I think that's what I was referring to there. And then, outside of the website, seeing if you can find some specific case studies. I guess the other avenue, I don't put a ton of stock in this. I know there's, what's the website, Corey, that people can look at, like Glassdoor?
Okay, so Glassdoor is one.
I don't know if I'd recommend that.
Here's why. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Glassdoor is all user-generated content. And the problem with Glassdoor is anyone, feel free after this meeting, go to glassdoor.com and try to look up an organization. What it asks you to do is create an account. And to view the information that you want, it wants you to generate content. Well, really think about that. You're looking for an organization. So likely if you're looking something up on Glassdoor, it's because you're unhappy or you're interested in exploring elsewhere. So how many of those people do you think are really going out of their way to rave and rant about how many happy employees are actually trafficking that site in the first place? And then I see organizations that will literally have little internal campaigns to boost their Glassdoor rating. And hey, everyone, please go sign in. It's such a bad litmus test. If you really want to know what people on the inside are saying, I know this may seem a daunting task, but you're on LinkedIn or you're send someone who works there a message. Hey, I'm looking at this as a possible organization that I'd be interested in being a part of, or wondering what it's really like over there. Do you have a few minutes to talk to me about it? Ask the hiring manager. Is there an individual, are they comfortable with you reaching out to someone to get their take on it? Ask, you're part of AEE. The vast majority of the industry is in some way, shape, or form going to be in connection with someone on this call. Hey, Josh, at the next event, do you know anyone over at Johnson Controls or anyone over at Siemens or anyone over at XYZ company that I could talk to? Because I might want to be interested in them, but I'd love someone's take from the inside. I put more stock into that than I would on a user-driven, subscription-based website like Glassdoor.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go too far down that path. I was just thinking like other avenues that folks can use to research and prepare. I think it all just comes down to your preparation going into the interview. So I think there's, as long as you're doing that, as long as you feel confident, you have your questions teed up, I would write down. I think a lot of it comes down to like the questions, the quality of the questions determine the quality of the candidate. In my, one of the aspects here. So the more intelligent, the more research-driven questions that you're asking, you're constantly elevating yourself in the eyes of the hiring manager. So I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can do. So I think that's it. I mean, we can go deeper on all those topics that, we could send more material later on, but I think that's good for now.
Well, let me open it up real quick to the members, see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll have a one parting question for you. Let's open it up and see if there's anything that anyone wants to ask.
Josh, I was just going to ask, what trends are you seeing in terms of, I know you talked earlier about the energy as a service market and that being a trend of growth. What other trends do you see? Do you see the traditional ESCOs growing? Do you see the smaller regional players growing? Or what market segment, the MUSH market or the private sector? Anything you can point to in terms of key growth recently?
Corey, I'll have you take that one.
Yeah, I will say, I think for a long time, there's been a lot of growth coming out of the smaller, more regional ESCOs. I think they've really been challenging a lot of the traditional major manufacturers or utility-backed players in the space, purely and truly because they can be more aggressive, more competitive, they can be more nimble, and they can come in with strategies that might have and go after projects that require less margin, go after projects that can be a little bit more creative, et cetera. And some of the challenges that were previously there for them as it relates to arranging financing, arranging capital, those challenges have been made easier, especially in a time of economic boom where money's easy and cheap to get. I will say it's also very regionally dependent. There's, as some folks on this already know, a lot of performance contracting and ESCO and really energy-related spend overall within the institutional segment is driven by legislation. And a lot of that legislation is vastly different on a state-by-state level. As it relates to the MUSH market overall, I would say it's seemingly continuing to be strong. I see a lot of excitement going back into the Fed space. I think there was a stint, was it last year, that maybe 2 or 3 projects were done industry-wide. And so there's more coming down the pipe and more excitement there. I've also seen some interesting plays and some interesting rumor mills lately as it relates to the model transitioning into areas of industrial and commercial applications where they're trying to utilize the model. And traditionally, if you didn't have a 2-year guarantee in a commercial application or 2-year payback in a commercial application, good luck getting past your first meeting. There seems to be more interest in some of that long-term investment. As it relates to one final area that there's a lot of talk about, and some organizations are succeeding, but it's still to be determined who the market leaders are going to be, is the P3 and cogen or big, large-scale lend-lease back scenarios. Those are, everyone's been talking about it for years. Some organizations have seen some big success, right? OSU really put a mark on the industry overall as, okay, can this be done? And some organizations are responding well and making it a sustainable market push. Some organizations are struggling with it with a little bit.
Right. Do you think that the growth in the current administration's plan for net zero and that growth is really going to accelerate the job market for energy engineers?
I was told years ago something that always sticks with me, and it relates. And I was told that the way that the federal market is highly dependent on the administration, but the way that the marketplace overall looks at it, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in office, how it's being positioned is purely just spin, right? If it's a Democrat in office, it's all about going green and net zero, et cetera. If it's a Republican office, it's about cost reduction. It's about better, wiser spending. It's about infrastructure or whatever the case may be. And I will say right now, there's a lot, as I said, it's a candidates market. There's a lot of organizations investing. I have seen no indication that there is going to be any significant downturn in opportunity or anything along those lines. I do think we're in a little bit of a bubble right now that I think will flatten out over the next couple of years just because of organizations hitting the pause button during COVID and now reinvesting. So I think it will flatten out a little bit over the next couple of years, but I don't see it going anywhere. Does that answer your question?
It really does. I appreciate that, Corey. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Going once. I have a question, and I'll end on this, guys. Really appreciate your time giving this presentation. It's been great. Can you, as a closing, give us a few examples of like bad career moves or things that you've seen? What should we for sure be avoiding, or like mistakes that we should avoid? And then maybe one or two things that you think could really benefit people in their career. So a couple things that we should definitely avoid, a couple things that we should try and do to help our careers.
Jim, you want to go on your end? I can touch on a couple after.
Yeah, I think it really just comes back to like not making a move. The thing to avoid, don't make a move just for money. If you don't have an additional, what I would call motivational congruency factor, meaning if the reason that you're about to take a new career is only because the increase in pay looks pretty sweet, can't pass up on it, I would highly recommend or advise against that. Now, if the money's sweet and the career advancement is there and the culture's there, great, you've won. Excellent. But don't make a move just for money. That'd probably be like the number one thing. Think long term when it comes to career transitions that we're talking about here, and that does tie back to making moves just for money. Like when I do have these conversations with candidates, and you look at their resume, like, yeah, you had a year here, you had 18 months here, you had 2 years there. What was going on there? And if they have the self-awareness and humility, they'll say, yeah, I was chasing the dollar. Or I had an opportunity to get in on the ground floor, some opportunity, and I was supposed to get equity, and it's supposed to result in some big payout, and it didn't happen. So think strategically when you're making these moves. Make sure you have alignment, and then really the second part of that question is like, what can you do? I would say it sounds simple, but just really be the best frickin' employee that you can be. Bring more value than you expect, than your boss expects. Like, go above and beyond. If you feel like you're in a lull, maybe you've been with this company for 5 or 6 years and you feel like you're in a lull, you're going through the motions. Remember it was like when you got hired on day one. Like, how hard did you work in those first 30, 60, 90 days because you were trying to impress your boss, you're trying to leave a good impression? Hit the reset button and work like that again, and then see what happens.
Perfect. Last chance, anyone, last questions before I close the meeting for Jim and Corey? If not, I thank both of you very much. Like I said, great presentation. Thank you to all the members for joining. Please come out. We're going to have Oktoberfest at Thin Line Brewing in mid-October. So please come out for that. Otherwise, we'll be sending out newsletters for new information or for the new events. I'll also send out some follow-up information that Corey and Jim have sent me. I will send it to everyone that participated in the call. Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jim and Corey.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.